amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello and welcome, listeners. Although my guest today, Eric Phillips, OAM, had become the first Australian, together with John Muir, to ski both the North and South Poles, these land-based explorations were not enough to satisfy Eric's immense quest for discovery and achievement. For Eric also became an astronaut, where from his perch in space he was able to look back down on the areas he'd conquered on this vast planet of ours, including across the ice caps of Greenland, Ellesmere Island, Iceland, Svalbard and Patagonia. And he is the inventor of the flexi ski binding used extensively by polar adventurers and has written a book, Ice Trekked: The Bitter Journey to the South Pole. Welcome, Eric.
Lovely to be with you, Rosemary.
Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. Now, Eric, your parents came over from the Netherlands, but tell me, were they adventurers? I mean, where did this exploration gene come from?
Are very much embedded in my parents and possibly even their forebears, because, for anyone to make the decision at a relatively young married life together to uproot from a country like the Netherlands to a country like Australia in the opposite hemisphere by ship, that takes a bit of adventure. So very much embedded in my genes, I think.
It certainly does. What part of the Netherlands? We were lucky enough to have a boat that we sailed the canals there for quite a few years. What part?
Aha!
Yes, so I know it well.
My dad is from near Den Bosch.
All right, yes.
From a small town called Breda. And my mum is from very close by Eindhoven in a small town called Hazer.
Oh,
so, and I've visited both of those places. Of course, I have many relatives in the Netherlands and spent a fair bit of time with them over the years.
Oh, how lovely. And you've got, you had 5 siblings. Were any of them adventurers in the sense that you are, Eric?
Certainly not in the same ilk as mine. They were adventurous in many other ways.
Right.
My sister, she lives in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, and she spends most of her time singing in a blues and rock band.
Oh, right.
Very adventurous traveler, travels all over Southeast Asia. And my sister came across with me to the States and watched the launch of our From to Space mission and had a ball over there. She gets around. She rides a Harley together with her husband all around South Australia.
Yes.
And then other brothers who had a little too much misadventure and died when they were much younger.
Oh, that's yes. I sadly read that in my research there, but. National Geographic set you on the course to conquering, didn't it?
Well, it kind of did, because as a 12-year-old, I remember pulling one of their magazines, National Geographic magazine, from the bookshelf in my family home growing up, and I flicked to a page, and it had an image of a person dressed up, for all intents and purposes, like a Michelin man, right, in this very, hefty, padded, insulated clothing, standing on this white plate of ice and with a beautiful dome of blue above them. And of course, that was someone standing in Antarctica facing the camera. And from that moment, I looked at that image, I thought to myself, I want to be that guy. I want to know what it's like to be standing on that ice, right, and to feel what I couldn't feel from the picture, which is the cold.
Yes.
But I wanted to know what it was like to be in that cold environment. And of course, now I know what that's very much like, having spent many nights locked inside a cold sleeping bag in a tent at -40.
Right. You certainly know what it's about. Now, you went to school at Timbertop. I mean, is that where your love of the cold started?
Well, actually, I went there as a teacher. I wasn't educated there. I was educated in South Australia.
Yes, I apologise.
Yes, no, that's okay. And so I was there as a teacher. I was the head of outdoor education for 5 years, and absolutely loved that job. And in fact, really, it did contribute pretty heftily towards my education anyway. Even though I was there to teach the kids who are year 9 kids from other Geelong Grammar School campuses, it really served me well in terms of learning about people, learning about myself, what my capabilities were, what knowledge I could impart on other people, and how I could best optimize that so that they could absorb as much of my information as possible. And I carried that through to my guiding as well, and ultimately through to my space mission, I think.
Tell us, Eric, how did you decide to do that very first trip to the South Pole? You went with John Muir and Peter Hillary, the son of the great Edmund Hillary. Perhaps describe that trip to us, your preparation, how you chose sort of who to join you, and how the personalities worked together over such hardship. And I mean, it was 84 days, and I gather Peter had a few problems, but he soldiered on, as you all did.
Yes, indeed. So the idea came to me of doing a return expedition to the South Pole. And that means starting from the coastline, skiing to the South Pole, turning around and retracing our steps back to our start point. This, of course, had been done by Amundsen, but using dogs back in 1911. And it had been attempted by Robert Scott, who started from Ross Island, made his way to the South Pole. And then, of course, the entire team perished on the Ross Ice Shelf on their return. So no one had actually achieved the out and back unsupported, just carrying their supplies in the sled behind them. So I set about planning this. I invited John Muir. I'd met him in an outdoor store in Melbourne, a couple of years earlier, and we just hit it off straight away. We in turn then invited Peter Hillary, who of course had spent a lot of time in the mountains and had climbed, like his father, Mount Everest, and we embarked on this expedition that would cover more than almost 3,000 kilometers. And laying supplies all the way there. And the idea was to pick those supplies up on the return journey. But sadly, we never completed that return journey. We were kind of not a very functional team, and we never managed to complete the return journey and were evacuated from the South Pole after covering 1,425 kilometers, and more to the point, a new route up the Shackleton Glacier, which had never been done before.
Right, and you, as you say, you were actually dragging your supplies behind you, which would have been an incredible feat. I mean, you must have had to take an enormous amount of goods and equipment with you, Eric.
Oh, indeed. At the starting block there at Scott Base, which is right next to McMurdo Station on Ross Island,
yes,
we managed to hoik our sleds onto into these large scales at the base, and they weighed in at 200 kilograms per person.
Wow.
That's 3 people sitting in a bathtub that we needed to drag to the South Pole and back. And so we, in a moment of panic, we took 10 kilograms of food out and thought, well, we'll just ski faster.
Yes.
And boy, did we struggle. So much so, of course, that we were just stymied by the distance, by the surface, and by our inability to really get it together as a team.
And how far would you travel each day, Eric, approximately?
Well, we needed to travel more than 20 kilometers a day, but we averaged traveling about 15 kilometers per day, which when you look these days at, speed records, for example, from Hercules Inlet to the South Pole, from an inner coastline of Antarctica to the South Pole, people are now doing 50 kilometers per day with everything that they require in the sled behind them. But of course, they are optimizing all of their preparations for a speed journey. So they don't expect to be out there for much longer than 20 days. Right. So their sleds are much, much lighter, and they're not planning to do the return trip as well. So yes, we were slow, yes, but those weights were very typical of expeditions in that era back in the 90s.
But you got there, and then Eric, not only was that enough, you then turned around later to decide that you and John Muir would go to the North Pole.
Yeah, we wanted to be bipolar. So we ticked off the South Pole. And I have to say, John and I came back, and and despite it being a lot of emotional turmoil because we didn't get on as a team, as a full team, John and I collaborated, and we just wanted to do more. So the North Pole was always on our agenda, and we ended up being delivered on the edge of Russia, Siberia, on an archipelago of islands called Severnaya Zemlya, basically meaning Northland. And we skied from there just over 900 kilometers over the course of 58 days across that frozen, drifting Arctic Ocean with pressure ridges and stretches of open water that we needed to negotiate. We used sleds that we could convert into, well, they were actually cut down kayaks, so we could use them to cross these areas of open water,
Right.
and arrived at the North Pole on my 40th birthday. Actually.
And I gather you fell in the water on the way, so that would have been, literally freezing.
It is freezing. I have fallen in the water, not on that particular trip, but
All
John
right.
certainly did. And boy, was that a moment on that expedition that we really struggled to turn around to our advantage. We'd spent at least half an hour scouting along the edge of what's called a lead, which is an avenue of open water. It was about 20 meters wide. What do we do? Do we scout around the side of it and try to look for an area that's frozen over, or do we hope that follow it along and hope that the two edges meet and we can step over, or do we try to use these kayaks to go across? And I thought, well, it kind of looks frozen enough, so I managed to get across to the other side.
Right.
What I didn't notice beneath my skis is what John saw from his vantage point is that the ice was just sponging and trampolining underneath me. So when it came to John's turn, who was 20 kilos heavier than me, he actually plunged through the ice and went up to his neck in the drink. And of course, wearing his boots and his down jacket, all his warm clothing, he lost a ski, which spiraled to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, and managed to get to my side. I pulled him out, and it took us 3 days to recover from that event.
I was going to say it'd be a really touch and go moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We needed to get the tent up very quickly, light the stove. As I said, it took 3 days not only to dry John and his belongings out, although we never managed to dry out his down jacket. That was really just 2 layers of fabric with wet cotton wool, down, clumps of down in between.
Yes.
Didn't provide him any insulation after that, but we managed to dry out his boots and his inners. And actually, I managed to make a ski binding, cobbling together all the bits that I could butcher from our equipment, and attach that to a spare ski that we carried with us, but we didn't have a ski binding. I made the binding. We split one of our skins in half, which is the traction that we use on the underside of the skis to give us purchase as we ski along. Cut that in half, put it on the new ski, and off we went.
Wow. When you arrive at your base for the night, our listeners, I'm sure that you have to pitch your tent. What about flooring? Do you have something that you put over the ice, and then you light your stove to obviously to heat up food and to keep you warm? But that must be quite a chore to do each night and get it all ready.
You've certainly done your research, because I'd like to point out to your listeners that no, we didn't have a floor on our tent. I thought, I'm going to go super lightweight on this trip. I'm going to take a pyramid tent, just a very basic pyramid-shaped tent with a single pole in the middle, without any floor, without any inner tent, so a single skin tent, and we would light our stove inside the tent and hope that we would create enough warmth inside where we could dry out our belongings, our socks and our inner gloves and all of those things that we expect to be dry by the next morning. That, of course, didn't happen. And that was, skiing in Antarctica, where you've got an incredible amount of sunshine, or at least solar gain because of your 24-hour cycle of daylight. You have a lot of opportunity to dry out in Antarctica overnight. And we brought that belief into the Arctic, thinking that the same would happen. But of course, that never happened. So it was a really tough time, dealing with the cold in that tent overnight. And often we slept in our sleeping bags at minus 40 degrees, which is a hell of a challenge.
You'd almost wake up a frozen solid, piece of ice, I would have thought.
Yes, that's right. And you really do rely on a number of things to survive the night. One, a very good sleeping bag, and we had dual layer sleeping bags with a down inner and a synthetic outer that tolerates the moisture. We had the stove so we could melt snow, and
Right.
we could both rehydrate our food and drink liquids and fluid, and create a modicum of warmth inside the tent to give us some recovery. But really, you do recover much more in Antarctica than you do on an expedition to the North Pole.
Now you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Eric Phillips, explorer, adventurer, and astronaut. Now you and John, of course, became the first people to ski over both poles, which is an absolute huge achievement. Plus, you did so much more exploring and discovery on Earth. But you decided, Eric, that wasn't enough for you. You wanted to go up into space. So tell us a bit about that.
Yes, indeed. So John and I did become the first Australians to arrive at both poles. Other Aussies had been to the North Pole and South Pole prior to us, but not together to the North and the South. And then I was invited on this mission into space. And the way that happened, it also began from a polar expedition. By then, I was guiding regularly in the Arctic to the North Pole and the South Pole and expeditions in Svalbard. And one of my customers in Svalbard, as we were skiing up this remote valley, he started talking about his love of space and what would it be like to fly to the moon? What would it be like to fly to Mars?
Right.
And I could see he had a deep interest in space, as I did too. I was 6 years old when I watched the Apollo 11 moon landing back on July 21, 1969. So we
Right.
had an affinity there.
Yeah.
And a few sentences later, he said, "Look, I'm also the world's first crypto billionaire."
Oh,
It's like, crikey, this
wow.
guy can afford to fly into space. Needless to say, 6 months later, I received a text while in Cape Town inviting me to join the mission.
Isn't that extraordinary? And well, tell us about that mission.
Yeah.
How long you were up there? 3 days, 14 hours, and 32 minutes. Tell us about that time.
Exactly. So, preceding that, of course, we had medical screening, we had centrifuge training, we went to Alaska to do extreme environment training. Not that extreme compared to the stuff that I was doing, but really did tease out some team things that we needed to work on. Then, of course, we had months on and off, about 4 months combined. Training in at SpaceX's training facility in Hawthorne, Los Angeles. And
Right.
then we were finally certified for flight. We'd done our training. We proved that we could do everything that we needed up there. And on March 31 last year, we listened to the countdown through the audio in our headsets, inside our suits with our visors down, strapped into our seats. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 liftoff. And we launched into space. And within minutes, we were in orbit and heading south and becoming the first humans ever to complete polar orbits. So we went directly over the South Pole and then
Right.
over the North Pole, and we completed 55 orbits around the Earth
Yes.
over the North and South Poles.
Gosh, Eric. So what did it feel like being up there looking down on all the places that you had conquered on Earth?
Well, luckily for me, when ground first opened the nose cone, revealing this beautiful cupola, which is our viewing bubble, if you like, that
Yes.
allows us to see the stars and the cosmos and Earth below us, we were over Antarctica at that time. So for me, a very special moment. What was so special for me about it is that despite a career of 35 years in the outdoors and 25 years guiding in the polar regions and exploring, I'd never had a polar winter.
Oh,
And
right. Right.
because we launched on the dark side of the equinox in late March, all of Antarctica was blanketed in this incredible pall of darkness. So, although we got to see the perimeter of Antarctica, the coastline, and I could pinpoint places that I'd been
Oh,
to,
really? Wow. Yeah.
mountain ranges that I'd skied through, glaciers that I'd climbed. I couldn't see the incredible polar plateau in the middle. And I didn't need to. I just felt that wonderful experience and the wonderful remoteness and isolation of that blackness of the Antarctic plateau beneath that pall of darkness. It was quite incredible.
It would have been absolutely, well, as you say, totally incredible. But Eric, I mean, I've recently watched anyway, the Americans heading to the moon, and they seem to be floating around and and their phones are floating around. Everything's floating, floating around inside. Did that happen to you? I mean, obviously it would have.
Absolutely. As soon as we pass the Kármán line, which is
Yeah.
around 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface, we are then in microgravity essentially. And we noticed that first because there's the restraints, the ends of our restraints or our seat belts are
Yes.
starting to lift up and float next to us. It's like, oh, something's happening here. And then Chun, who was the mission commander and financier of this expedition, he released our zero gravity indicator, which is for us a small plushy polar bear with an emperor penguin necklace around its neck, symbolizing, of course, the two great polar creatures, the polar bear and the emperor penguin.
Right.
And he released that. It had a little tether on it, and we just watched that float around the cabin while we were still in our seat restraints. It wasn't until we reached our orbital height of around about 440 kilometers that we could get out of our restraints, doff out of our suits,
Yes.
and begin our 3.5 day mission around our gorgeous planet.
And how would you eat up there? That's something that's fascinating me. Does the food float around as well?
Everything floats around, literally, like us.
You have
Everything.
to grab hold of it.
Exactly, that's right. I mean, some things we can just allow
Yeah.
them to sort of float around, so
Yeah.
long as we, keep a mental track of where they are. For example, we have a lot of water bottles that we need to drink and hydrate from, and every water bottle has a little tab of Velcro on it.
Oh,
And
okay.
all around the cabin, we have little strips of Velcro where we can stick all of our belongings, most of which have Velcro attached to them, to those little bits and pieces. But the food is essentially like camping food. Rip the top off a packet and
Yes.
eat a dry burrito or some pre-prepared dal or Indian food or, a stew of some sort, all
Right.
cold, mind you. We don't have the opportunity to heat any of our food up there because we
Yeah.
don't have any cooking facilities, no microwave, as they do on the International Space Station. So very much camping food, but certainly getting enough calories inside us that are required, about 2,000 calories per day per person.
Right. Gosh, Eric, and what did it feel like when you landed back on our planet? And here you were. I mean, did being in space like that sort of change your prospectus on life here on Earth?
Yes, well, look, we started to plan our return to Earth. Well, I say plan, but it's a fully autonomous mission, of course. All of the data is uploaded to the flight computer, and from launch through to splashdown, the capsule sort of looks after itself. And then the next layer is ground control. But we do actually our pilots have the capability to plan and enact an emergency deorbit and splashdown in an area on Earth of our choosing, somewhere in the ocean. We never needed to do that, of course, but we start to plan for our return to Earth about 4.5 hours before we re-enter into the atmosphere. We position ourselves at a point where we can then splash down in the right location off California. We don our suits, of course. We're into our seats. We buckle down and strap down, and then we're plummeting at 500 kilometers through the
Wow.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
We have our nose cone positioned towards the Earth, so that's copping most of the heat. And then the two drogue parachutes, they deploy at about 5.5 kilometers. At about 1.8 kilometers, the four main parachutes, they deploy and inflate and settle us very gently at about 20 kilometers an hour in the ocean just off Los Angeles. And
Wow.
that was an incredible moment of, people often are concerned about launch,
Yes.
but it's actually the return to Earth that is the most dynamic of the stages and the one
Yes.
to be most concerned about and that you really need to get sorted. But after returning to Earth, it took a little while, of course, to get used to 1G again, 1G of gravity.
Right.
And, it felt strange that I couldn't just float off my chair and go and grab a cup of coffee or something to eat. It was a very strange feeling, and probably took a week before my head was back in some kind of normal state. And boy, did we miss it, all four of us. It's like we'd go back up there in a heartbeat.
But Eric, you must have a very understanding wife. I mean, I can't imagine if Rob said to me, look, I'm off to the South Pole, now I'm off to the North Pole, but now I'm up to space. I mean, what does your wife think of all this?
Look, Susie has, we've been together for now over 30 years. It's probably a bit of a rarity with someone like myself, who's spent so much time away from home on expeditions, running a business on top of that as well, and incredibly tolerant woman. I love her dearly. Really, any of the expeditions and accolades that I've had over my years, really, I attribute to her. And she had the opportunity. She came over with me together with my son to watch the launch, to be with us in quarantine for the week before we launched, and to be in Los Angeles again for splashdown. My daughter wasn't there, unfortunately. She was in Svalbard, guiding our expedition. So it was a pretty magic moment that I could FaceTime with her as I flew over Svalbard, and she was down there on the ice below me, a really special moment. So the whole family, incredibly supportive, but very much involved in the entire mission.
Oh, how wonderful. Sadly, Eric, we're running out of time, but I just very quickly wanted to touch on your business, which, of course, is guiding and polar equipment design business and Ice Trek Expedition. So just tell us very quickly a little bit about that.
Yes, it's a company that I founded at the back end of our first South Pole expedition, which was called Iridium Ice Trek, after our sponsor. And so I called my company Ice Trek Expeditions and Equipment. And indeed, that's exactly what we do. We take people from all corners of the Earth to the ends of the Earth, and on expeditions to the North and South Poles, and design and manufacture equipment that perfectly suit those expeditions as well.
How wonderful. What is the web page for that, Eric?
The webpage is simply icetrek.com, ICETREK.com. And if people want to go and find out about the mission, f2.com, from 2 was the name of our mission, and f2.com is the URL.
How wonderful. Eric, look, thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us. And this program has been produced in the studios of 4RPH Reading Radio in Brisbane for syndication around Australia, and will be available on my YouTube channel. Lots to chat about with Rosemary Peterswald. But thank you, Eric, and thank you, Paul, for producing.
Thank you.
My pleasure indeed, Rosemary. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.